Hey Jen, how are you?
Hey, Jen. I'm good. I'm so excited about our guest today.
Me too. Me too. Before we dive into our one of our favorite people, do you have any things going on that you would like to share?
Sure. Well, we have a program coming up this coming week on Wednesday on the topic of Juneteenth. So we've been doing some thought leadership on it, and Juneteenth is this Friday. And I'll let you all look it up or sign up for our newsletter because we're gonna put a thought paper out there about the history of the day, the importance of it, the ways that it's being commemorated, and particularly my interest always is the workplace activities that flow from that and what we recommend. I know it's a little late, but I'm glad to say some companies anyway are looking into it and doing things, to utilize the day to educate, progress our understanding and our accountability and all that stuff. So, but we need more because it's a relatively, I think, new topic of discussion
Mhm.
in my world ever since last June. So
Mhm.
yeah. So anyway, we have a free program on Wednesday, and if you'd like to know more about it, like follow us on social. We'll be getting the word out. We have been getting the word out. But please join us and learn. We're partnering with an organization called Black Facts, and they do what it sounds like they do, which is educate about facts and history. So I'm just really excited to spend time with them too and learn myself.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. It's good
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Hmm. Nice.
How about you?
Well, I'm excited because this will be a good segue into bringing our guest on today. But we have been working on an anthology book for at least the last year and a half, might even be a little bit longer than that. It's called The Real Lives of Transgender and Non-Binary Humans, and it is live at some point in the next couple of days. So like we're really close. So we have an event coming on June 24th. That is a launch event where we get to bring in people who contributed. Brandy, who was the kind of the writer behind the scenes, helping everybody craft their story and whatnot. And so it's kind of a celebratory thing for Pride. So we didn't actually intend for it to launch during Pride season. It just happened to work out that way after two calendars working on this. So I'm super excited and I'm looking forward to spreading all the goodness for everybody to kind of
All the goodness.
to learn from. And
Yes,
our guest
yes.
today, Rhodes Perry, is part
Hey,
of that
Hello.
anthology. Hi,
yeah,
Rhodes.
it's so great to be here. Hi.
Hi.
Yes. Oh my God.
Hi.
It's always fantastic to see you. There's no shortage of greatness when we, and so I'm happy that you are here. So why don't we start off by just sharing a little bit about what you, because there's so many.
I missed your question, Jen. You broke up there.
My internet's on. So can you hear me at this point?
Yes, yes.
Yes. So share what you do.
Oh yeah, yeah. Sure, definitely. Well, I'm in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, like Jennifer, and I get to help business leaders work towards and build this emotional outcome of belonging. And a lot of the work that we do focuses around psychological safety and trust building and getting organizations to actually have the skills to measure and assess this thing of belonging, right? And so I'm very fortunate for people like Amy Edmondson, who's done a ton of research around psychological safety, making it easier to kind of have these measures and helping organizations get their fingers on the pulse of building a greater sense of belonging. And I love it. I get to work with lots of different clients, largely in the United States. And over the past, I don't know, since we've been in pandemic times, and in particular after the police murder of George Floyd, this work has been front and center in a really powerful way. And my hope is that it is not a moment, it's a movement. And I think that I'm starting to see some positive signs of that, at least with some of the clients that I'm working with. And we'll see, history will tell, but that's a little bit about what I do.
Rose, I would ask, what is different about this June versus last June? I know so much is different. June over June, right? It feels like a lifetime in one year. in a good way, in a hard but ultimately, I think, accelerating way. So where does this Pride season find you from a teacher perspective, from an advocate perspective? I guess I might ask, we are deep in this work, but I'm sure it's been a year of learning for you too, even.
Yeah. Yeah,
So how have you, what journey have you gone on in the last year in terms of your own understanding about your voice, your advocacy, what needs to happen, what we need to talk about that we haven't been talking about, any of the above?
Yeah. Well, I think just in terms of this June versus last June, the programming that you're doing around Juneteenth, and as that intersects with thinking about Pride Month activities and seeing, just in kind of like the ERG space, real creativity around kind of cross, intersectional work, right? So seeing Black ERG groups working with Pride ERG groups and talking about the Black history of the LGBTQ movement, right? It just, there's real creativity just in that space alone. But I think kind of like zooming out, well, there was a lot to your question. There were like questions within the question. I think like some of the things that I've seen over this past year, in the DEI space is real concern around harm, whether it's interpersonal harm that's been caused by a person that holds more power and privilege versus those that don't in the workplace, or organizations as a whole ignoring some of the real challenges for some employees who don't feel even safe enough to show up in the workplace, and creating the space to get curious about learning the why before rushing into trying to heal or getting into that space of fixing something that feels broken. I think that's been a big theme that I've seen. And to maybe a lesser extent, like spaces that have done it well of like talking through the challenges, but at least being courageous enough to hold space to learn more from employees and their lived experiences, as a contrast with current events, and just the way that work is changing as well. When we think about kind of living through pandemic times and kind of as organizations are opening up now, this kind of space around hybrid working, and as that kind of butts up against DEI commitments, I think that's just evolving now. It's I'm kind of holding my breath, but also trying to be as engaged as possible to get organizations and in particular leaders to start looking at this hybrid workplace with that DEI lens that they've done so much work in investing and building up. And I'm not quite seeing that connection in enough places. And again, that's our role, is to start to continue to ask those hard questions of like, wait a minute, let's connect this inclusive leadership work you've done over here with how you're restructuring work. So it's there's always a puzzle, right, to kind of engage and be involved with. And I love that.
Yeah. And so is that the way that you're educating folks right now? So you have one book that's already out. You have another book that's coming out in the fall. You have a summit that's about to launch this week. Yeah. Have you already started to incorporate kind of I don't want to say like not pre-pandemic and not post-pandemic, because we're not really post yet, but like the learnings that you were just talking about in terms of like how to kind of navigate that hybrid space? Are those things that you're either talking about in your book or during your summit that's coming up?
Yeah, in both. For sure, in the summit itself, the speakers make the coming up with the content really easy, because that's where a number of other DEI leaders are at, and kind of the work that they're doing with their clients or in the spaces that they're in, as well as a number of folks that are involved in the summit that aren't necessarily DEI leaders. They're more kind of engaged in social justice movements, and that intersection has been really great. So yes, so kind of talking about restructuring work in that way, as we're kind of imagining what is this going to look like, because we're not sure, we've never been here before. And absolutely in the book is kind of looking at both ourselves and kind of our role in leading the change that we want to see in the workplace, how we kind of work and build teams, but then more broadly, like how do we even structure this thing that we call work in our organizations? And in that last part, it's really kind of naming, okay, traditionally, this is how we've structured work. We've concentrated power and decision-making in a hierarchy. There's lots of possibilities of how we could do this different. And then kind of what's available to you in this moment right now, what feels like you can kind of take this right risk or try something different that doesn't feel totally out of reach. And so that's really kind of the framework, the thinking of the book is like, where are we now? What's possible and what can you commit to? So my hope is not to scare people, but to kind of push them gently of like, we can do this. And it starts with you, right? So that's been fun. It's very creative work. And trying to kind of name these things that aren't quite present in our work environments now, but just, picking up the pen and trying to. And my hope is that, when people read it and they might say, like you didn't quite get it. I'm like, I can't wait to see what you write. Keep going, keep adding to this, because we have to start naming what we want instead of kind of crossing our arms or throwing up our hands and being frustrated with what we have right now.
Yeah, that's kind of why I was asking, because I feel like you're in such a new uncharted territory that by you putting a book out that's coming out in the fall to be kind of talking about this in real time, that people have to figure out how to adapt to this. I feel like, it must come with its highs and lows of like, you don't have data points to go back on. So in a lot of ways, it's probably just kind of what you feel, which I think is empowering.
Yeah. There's a little intuition. There's a little kind of like anecdotal elements that come from just like the immediate client work that I'm doing, right? So it's very qualitative. There's definitely not an N of 100 or more, right? So my hope is just to kind of share with what's being experienced kind of from my limited worldview, and hope that opens up conversation and sparks a study, maybe like lights up some of the academics, maybe some folks who are in the academy right now watching. Please, we need your research. Keep going. Like that helps the practitioners tremendously.
Yeah.
True. Oh, Rhodes, yeah, it's really resonating, the whole idea of crafting a new language, I think, and acknowledging that maybe we, for whatever reason, the way we've talked about all of this that we're passionate about on this call is not resonating. We're not hitting or not connecting the dots with certain people. And the need to really create different language or a new way of talking about it in a way that doesn't repel people, in a way that invites people in, and that feels, okay, self-interested maybe. I mean, I'm here for sort of anything that brings the horse to water. You know what I mean? I don't really even judge. I mean, do I wish everybody were convinced of the moral need, and the rightness of this topic and change that we need to see? But in the meantime, I do think those of us who write about this are trying to create meaning, or trying to wrestle it down to something concrete, or trying to take it maybe outside of the realm of complicated feelings that hold us back and we get stuck in like molasses.
Yeah.
And and instead talk about behaviors and actions, and people they're very action biased, and so I think people like a very practical style too of saying, like, the worst, nobody should read your work or my work or even yours, Jenn, and be like, I don't know what to do.
Right? Yes.
I'm like, no.
We're not short on ideas there. Yeah.
Right. Did you read the books?
Right.
Yeah. So I think that we are the practitioners, Rhodes, like nailing this down from the academy, right? I think, I love the books that have come out that are on all the bestseller lists. They've been really needed, but it still leaves the reader with this question mark of, what do I do tomorrow? And what's the right next step? And what's the most reasonable next step for me that I would feel able to take? And I don't want to say comfortable, because we need to be comfortable being uncomfortable. But what is the most realistic next step for somebody to take that represents a stretch for them? To me, like, at the end of the day, like, it's not about this empirical truth of like the right next step, but it's, to me, the next step, like it's in context with what has gone before it, where a person is coming from. I mean, people can travel a really long journey, in their learning, that some of us might poo-poo and say, well, where have you been all this time? But for them, it represents something enormous.
Yeah.
So.
And I think you hit on like the developmental piece of this, of what we do, right? Whether it's kind of individually, which I'm a believer, change at any level, it's got us, we have to be involved in it, and we kind of have to look inwardly and that developmental journey is going to look super different. Like where we are, you know, is going to look super different than someone who's just arrived to say, I really care about this. I'm not really sure. This is brand new to me. I'm scared. Like, you know, and I think that's where kind of the grace comes in, where, you know, if people have been doing this work for their entire careers, right? Like the grace has to be, welcome to the party. Here's the ladder. Come and join us, you know, when you're ready to kind of take that next ladder rung and step up, you know, or move up. Right. And I think that's the exciting part of the work, because that makes it hard, right? Because we might be using different language to maybe kind of talk about similar dynamics that are taking place inside the workplace. You know, that's at the individual level. And I think organizationally, and this kind of the components that get in between the individual and how we structure work itself, that's also, you know, we might want to push an organization to kind of be in alignment with one that we may have worked at previously, but that organization might just be getting started, and that could cause more harm, you know, if we start to, you know, speed up and kind of miss important foundational steps. So I think that's maybe where some of the overwhelm comes in, is kind of identifying, you know, where you're at in this journey, and also where your organization is at. And sometimes people want that kind of prescriptive, okay, here's my checklist. I mean, it's just going to go through, and it just doesn't work that way. You know, it doesn't work that way. And the books help, you know, because it gives us more of a common language together, you know, to kind of identify where we are. And even with that, you know, sometimes people want that one book that's going to help them solve all of the culture challenges in their organization. Hopefully it's a starting place, right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's still a leaning on us. I think that's a little bit of an abdication of accountability, you know. It's like, I love that last question I always get with like 1 minute to go, and it's like, what's the one thing that we all should do, you know? First of all, I just gave you 60 things. Why do you want one thing? Do you all get asked that? It's yes. Like always. I'm like,
it's like the famous last question of any podcast.
Famous.
And you're like, did we not just discuss this?
Did we?
So, yeah.
Yep.
I'm curious, Rhodes, is kind of what we're talking about in terms of the overwhelm and the amount of, just because there's so many directions that any of this could go. Is that part of the origin of why you started a summit? I'm just kind of curious, like because I know you've done it before and with good success. And so I'm just kind of curious, like what the origin was of that. And is that complementing all of the other work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think a big piece of creating the summit, and this was before pandemic times, was recognizing, you know, there's a lot of great DEI conferences and programming that happens all over the world, right? And those folks that lead the work and the organizations that have the resources that have made the investment will send kind of those visionaries, those staff charged with making sure that DEI goals within the organizations advance. And we also know that it takes everybody to kind of build that affirming, positive, inclusive, equitable culture. And it only takes like one person to really create a toxic environment. And so, you know, I wanted to create something that was accessible for as many people that care about the work, that's maybe passionate about the work, and they don't have DEI in their titles, right? They may not even be involved in an ERG or a DEI committee, right? Yet they feel like that there's a connection to their work. And so I wanted to make that accessible. That was my number one goal. I was like, we're going to just continue to talk in echo chambers if we don't open this up in a different way. And so that was kind of my small contribution of like, well, here's a space, and hopefully more people will create other spaces that we can engage in these conversations that maybe too out of reach for some conferences, or even within, you know, a corporate setting of like, we would really love to talk about confronting systems of oppression. It's not going to happen here, right? So where does it happen? You know, where can we move beyond kind of the 101 conversations? Where can we move beyond the importance of, yes, let's talk about unconscious bias. Let's talk about coming up with a DEI strategic plan, whatever those basic foundational things that are needed. And, you know, where can we continue to to really dive in on those really thorny challenges that people feel like they have to talk at a water cooler to really kind of name the elephant in the room. So that was kind of the main motivation. And it's been really interesting. This is the third year that we're doing it. So it's not like, this has been a historical event that's been going on for forever. Yet it continues to evolve in really, really lovely ways. And that's largely because of the people participating, whether it's the speakers or the people who show up. And it's really, I can never predict what will happen. It's usually powerful in a positive way. And so I'm hoping to continue that.
So good. So good. I love how you have it structured, and it seems like such a good idea. And yes. And so can you just give quickly just the details of it? Because I want to ask you about the anthology too.
Mm-hmm.
But just knowing that it's coming up like this week. So for folks to like register, or like, what is it?
Oh yeah. So the Belonging at Work Summit, or so that's July 12th through the 16th.
Oh,
so
July. Okay.
Right. So people have time. Yeah.
All right. There's a whole 6 weeks to go. For some reason,
that's why I still have my hair, but by July it's all going to be gone. So that's.
Oh, nice. So Belonging at Work Summit.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay. And there's a link. We have a link in the description too, that people can go and check out and register and all those fun things.
Great. Thank you. Yeah.
Jenn, did you have, I feel like I spoke over you.
Oh, it's okay. No, I just, I want to know, so what's the state of the state on progress with, and you've got the anthology coming out, and I hope to actually highlight some pieces, maybe do a podcast interview on my podcast, The Will to Change.
Yeah.
Yay! So, but I'm curious, as a cisgender identified person, as the aspiring ally that I hope to be for those who are not cisgender, I am trying my best to think about like, how has that conversation been changing, evolving, progressing, hopefully, deepening, maturing. And I still get so many pronoun questions in my keynotes. Like just today, how do I broach the conversation about keynotes? Do you recommend like if I share mine and then ask others to share theirs, or should I just wait until they're comfortable? I mean, or should we have them in our email signatures? So we're still, I feel like we've been here for a while, but it's good. It's good. I'm really glad that even if the uptake is small but mighty and it's starting to spread. That's great. So I would say, state of the state in as few words as possible, Rhodes. Where do you think are we making progress? And how are we? I hope we're looking at things through an intersectional lens. I know you carry that flag for that, and so do I. Who's missing in the conversation? What data are we not sharing? Who's benefiting from certain policies and who's not? Who are we missing? Because to me, that is the animating question to be asking when we speak about diverse identities and marginalized experiences. Is they're sort of not the pain Olympics, because I love saying, Kenji Yoshino always says it's not the pain Olympics. They don't get caught in this oppression hierarchy.
Right.
But at the same time, I do think about which voices rise to the top. I do think about who gets the bandwidth and the airtime, and if we're not very careful and very vigilant, who becomes the faces of a community, and who gets to say. So anyway, I just wonder sort of how that whole like gender identity conversation and practice is progressing in the workplace. How is it becoming much more intersectional in the way that it should? What do you want us to know about what you would say is the status here in June 2021?
Yeah, big question. So quickly, I'd say visibility is good. There's people are gaining awareness. If we start with pronouns in practice or email signatures, great. That is barely the tip of the iceberg. Policies are barely the tip of the iceberg. I think in terms of representation, I think if people are asking you the question in keynotes, is those same event organizers thinking about whether it's panels, topics on DEI, when thinking about representation, I would push to say, if you have a panel of speakers, how many of those speakers are not are not cisgender, right? As an element of making sure that we're being super inclusive and intersectional. I'd say in organizations that I work with that focus on leading with race or building anti-racist organizations is recognizing your organization will not be fully anti-racist unless a Black trans woman can be considered for a job opportunity, just like a Black cisgender woman could be. Really kind of connecting those dots, like I was sharing with Juneteenth and Pride, and being innovative. And I'm seeing that. I'm seeing that in spaces with the resources of the staff, the DEI staff that are really pushing. And I think it's an opportunity for those businesses, those organizations that are just getting started with this work to remember, this is holistic, and we can't kind of section out social aspects of our identities. We are all parts. And thinking about gender in a super inclusive way, beyond men and women in a binary element of representation, I think will really benefit organizations to think about, wow, there's so much more to this than even some of the structural pieces. I guess like my last piece is like in representation is thinking about leadership, and not so much kind of like, we'll include you. It's what's the value of actually having trans and non-binary folks on leadership teams, being able to kind of look at your organization through a completely different perspective that I would argue most organizations don't have, and why that would benefit as you're preparing for the future of work, when we know already research in the United States alone is looking at, internationally is looking at 1 in 4 Zoomers expected to transition their gender at some point in their life, whether that's a social transition, or some combination of social, legal, and medical transition. I think that's huge. Young people have a very different view of gender, and it's super fluid, and we have to get curious about that.
So good. And my hope is that in some way, the anthology that you were kind enough to be included in can help it at least be that surface level, like shining the light on like, hey, here's something you might want to explore in more detail. Because it's really just, it's a collection of stories. It's not here to solve the problem. It's here to kind of illustrate, hey, here's the problems that folks are facing. And then they can kind of take that next step, which could be engaging with either of you in terms of how to actually implement something in their workplace or in their, whatever environment they might be in.
Yeah. I think the anthology, thank you so much for the opportunity to be a part of it. It's that piece, we talk about building empathy muscles, and one of the easiest ways to do that is by reading, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, stories of other people that don't share your exact same experiences. Super easy way to start flexing those muscles. So thanks for making that an element that helps Jenn and I do this kind of work. So
that's the goal. That's my contribution. Is at least helping share everyone else's stories. Yes,
it's the dream team. No, it's
yes,
great.
We are a dream team. I like it. All right. Well, Rhodes, this has been such an awesome conversation. I feel like we really didn't even come close to scratching the surface, but it's always good to connect with you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. It's so great to see you both. And more soon. Thank you.
More soon, definitely. Thanks, Rhodes.
And Jenn, I don't know when we are scheduled next, but we will be back, and then we're gonna be announcing a few things in the next time that we are live. So we'll cross that bridge in the next couple of weeks or so.
That's right. Yeah, I look forward to that. But in the meantime, see you later.
All right, goodbye, everyone.
Yeah.